Off the chatting, but we are going to start the broadcasting live as well as this event here at Junction. I am Rosalia Sciortino. I am the founder and director of Junction, and Junction is this venue here based at the Bangkok Arts and Cultural Center, and we focus on Southeast Asia, all kinds of issues related to Southeast Asia. At the moment, we have quite beautiful exhibition of photo stories or migrants in Thailand. You can see it on the same floor. And this event is about a very important topic, even more pressing these days, where authoritarianism is increased in this region. So it's about censorship, but particularly about censorship in the art, with 3 case studies from Indonesia, Thailand, and Philippines, if I am correct. But first, the word will be given to Katie Roland. We are collaborating here with Arts Ecuador, and they are going to present a research that they have conducted in various countries in Southeast Asia. And Katie will give us the overview of the project and the research. Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I usually start off by saying I'm very happy to see familiar faces in the room, but actually today I'm really happy to see unfamiliar faces. So welcome to all of you who are new to the project for the first time. So my name is Kathy Rowland. I'm the co-founder of Arts Equator, and over the past 2.5 years, we've been working on a project called the Southeast Asian Art Censorship Database. Sitting with me are my three of my collaborators, Adrian Jonathan Pasaribu, who is the researcher from Indonesia. I'm going to just skip to Katrina Stewart Santiago, who is the researcher from the Philippines, because the two of them have been part of the original program, the pilot that we did. But we also have a new colleague, really a pleasure to have Putong Patpon, who is who most of you will know, who is taking over from Dr. Sudarat Musikawong, who was our Thai researcher for the pilot program. So, we're here today really, at the invitation of Junction. So I'd like to also just express our thanks to Professor Rosalia and her team for all the wonderful organizing and for hosting us today. So why am I here, and what are we doing about? What is this project about? Why did we do it? We started this project, this pilot project, actually in January of 2022, and the idea really was to try and create a pilot project to document arts and culture censorship in Southeast Asia. Now, we say Southeast Asia, but for the pilot, we really focused just on 6 countries. And the idea really, the reason that we did it was we know that arts and culture practices have a really long history in the region, but equally long is the fact that they have been censored or prescribed either by the colonial government or by national governments that have come after. And in a way, it's a sign, and it's a sign of and an indication of really how important the artists are because of the work that they do, which kind of pushes boundaries, which kind of provides alternative narratives to that compared to the state, for example. But in terms of monitoring, in terms of attention, in terms of just the focus, traditionally it's really been the media. It's been suppression of the media and suppression of political thought that has really gathered a lot of energy, a lot of activism, a lot of international attention. Whereas with artists, it kind of sometimes feels like, oh, it's terrible when it happens, and then you move on to the next cycle. But we don't believe that. We all work in the arts. We're really committed to the arts. It's part of who we are. It's in our DNA. And what we felt was that the lack of public record and this kind of fading institutional memory, it acts as a shield, as a protection for the people, the agents that attack the arts. And it kind of, enables them to kind of continue to suppress artists without any kind of repercussion. Also, the other reason is that there's a lot of people will talk. Artists will always tell you about this case or that case, but actually finding really data-supported information about the patterns of art censorship is really quite rare. So for us, again, it was this thing of, it wasn't just the project, but it was trying to design a way, a methodology in how to document art censorship, both above the line, obvious censorship that we all know, but also more subtle forms of censorship and control. And that's why, this project started. Now I'm going to maybe ask, okay. So for the pilot, our scope was 6 countries, and we decided to actually do archival research and documentation over a 12-year period, which is from 2010 to 2022. We wanted to we were quite ambitious, and so we focused across all the art forms that you will recognize. But because in Southeast Asia, we know that it's not just, theater or film or visual arts, but it's actually cultural practices as well that get attacked. So we included customs. We included, for example, one example is that in Malaysia, where tattooing is part of the indigenous tribal customs, there was a decree that actually, if you wanted to join the police force, even from that region where tattooing was practiced, you were not allowed to do it. So that was included into our database. We hope to expand into more than the 6 countries moving forward, but those were you see the countries over there. And we worked with local in-country researchers because one of the focuses, I think, for this project is that we wanted to develop local in-country expertise. There have been a lot of monitoring of arts in Asia or in the third world, and a lot of it's done actually out of agencies and organizations that are based in Europe who have, in a way, created the pathway for the work that we do. So, they've done really good work, but it's been a bit extractive that the researchers are not based locally. So for us, again, it was trying to develop the expertise that we have and to kind of spread that out. We worked with public sources because it really had to be cases that were in the public domain. So a lot of it's using press clippings, social media posts, although there were also some cases where we focused on interviews with artists because the works were not in the public domain. Again, when we move into the second phase of the project, we'll actually be doing a lot more of that. And I think what we were trying to do was we asked ourselves a really simple question. Who are the agents that attack the arts? Why do they do it? What kind of arts do they attack? What methods do they use? And then what happens next? What do the artists do after? And so just based on that kind of simple baseline information, the findings that we had, we came up with some findings. Another thing that we tried to do when we were designing the project was that we did not just want to focus on, I guess, what you would call above the line, the obvious kinds of censorship that we are all familiar with, right? A work is censored, a play is pulled out, a whole scene is cut from a film, works are destroyed. For us, the idea of challenging, so it's not just censorship, but it's challenges to artistic freedom is important. And that's the way, on the ground, artists experience it. It's partial removal of work, it's restriction. So you'd have a case of, for example, a play that should be general access, but suddenly the municipal agency gives it an R18. So it cuts out, a large part of the audience, which can sink a theater company. Or, for example, a film or a book that, a TV show that should be on broadcast, but suddenly is removed from broadcast. Although then it can maybe go on YouTube, but it changes the dynamics of the work as well, and who interacts. So the idea of restriction and distribution and access was really important to us. Sometimes censorship and challenges happen under the guise of, well, I can't give you the resources anymore. You can't use my venue anymore, right? And so for us, those kinds of withdrawals were important. Increasingly, we were seeing kind of accusations and public statements, gatekeeping, challenges and pressure as well. So when we combine all of those, what we were trying to actually track and what we're trying to track is not just the extremes when it's already too late. The artist is already jailed, the country is already jailing artists. And I say this in full awareness of where we sit today. But what we're really interested in is actually how do we measure the temperature? Right? Does the temperature rise at a certain time? Does the temperature go down at a certain time? So, and that's why you'll see that, the findings that we have, I think, is quite unique because there are no other systems that do this. So I'm going to share some of the basic findings, but I want to just, a caveat is the fact that as much as we are proponents of data-driven facts and numbers, they will only tell you one story. that can never be the whole story, because censorship, as artists experience it, is messy, it's multiple, it's slippery. So while I'm going to present a lot of numbers and data for all of you, just bear in mind that there actually are there's a more nuanced story than what I'm going to present today, and I would really urge you to read the full country reports that are on our website on artsequator.com, which will give you a more fleshed out idea of what are the conditions for artistic practice in Southeast Asia. I need 4 hands to do this, and I have 2. Strange. So when we looked at across the 6 countries, we actually documented over the 12 period over 600 unique cases of art censorship. And the most frequent form was actually film. It's not a surprise, because basically the forms that are the most widely distributed are the forms that are most controlled, number one. And the second thing is that film, a lot of the controls and the administration of film goes back decades to during the colonial times, for example, in most of these countries. So as soon as film started appearing in the colonies, the colonial powers started to introduce laws that were meant to control it. So popular forms are really always more vulnerable. But look, so I won't go into it only because we don't have a lot of time, but you'll see that across the region there are actually different forms that are more vulnerable to challenges. And I just want to pick up on Thailand and visual arts a little bit. I mean, I believe that I'm not wrong to say that actually visual arts is not a huge popular form in Thailand. But the reason that the numbers are high when we looked at the data across the region is that we included public monuments, we included graffiti, we included sculpture and public art. And it's not so much the form, but the access of the public to it. Okay. We also we used the term agent when we wanted to talk about the kind of individual or the organization that attacked the artists, that were violating the artist's rights. And the field, I have to say, is really complex. There are multiple stakeholders and agents that restrict freedom of expression in the arts. But in the research tool that we designed, we asked 2 questions, right? So the first question that we asked the researchers to identify who was the primary agent. So which was the organization or the individual that caused the most damage to the artwork or the artist, or that had that used the most impactful method to restrict freedom of expression. So huge shocker, it was the state. the numbers are very high, unequivocal, and you'll see that the public comes at a sorry. I'm restricting your freedom to sit up, but the public comes at a very fast second, and then we have art stakeholders and religious institutions. So just bear that in mind, because the second question that we asked was actually, we asked them to also document if there was more than one agent in a case, and more than in 33% out of the 600 cases, there was actually more than one agent. Sometimes there were 4 agents, 5 agents. But when we looked at cases that had more than one agent, a secondary agent, so to speak, what you see is that suddenly there's not such a big difference between the state and the public, right? So the picture then changes. Oh, next one. No, next one. That, okay, right. We're saying that this is our early research. Obviously, it would be wonderful if other people took this data and explored it further. But what we're seeing is that you'll see that the picture really changes. And what is, again, no one in this room, this is not new to any of us. We know it because we're practitioners. But now we actually have data that proves what we all feel and experience. And the fact is that actually the public is emerging as a really powerful instigator for artistic freedom. I want to just maybe quickly just say that the reason this is significant is that when it's the state or the authority that's suppressing arts, in some ways, what it allows the artist to do is it allows us to be very clear that we have got the moral high ground. We're doing work and we're being suppressed by authority. But when it's when it's the public, in a way, it deflates it can be used to deflate your argument, because it can be said that, well, if the public doesn't like your work, then it's not censorship, right? But when you look at the ways that a lot of our societies are constructed, I mean, these are manufactured concepts, right? I mean, some of it is decades of education policies, populist policies that then construct particular kinds of public that are very activated to make a big deal about work. That offends them, right? We also looked at what were the methods that were used to impede artistic freedom. And when we came to this, I mean, we were quite surprised actually to see that such a large number, so almost 400 out of the 600 plus cases involve full banning, censorship, destruction of work. But to do something like that, in general, you need to have power. In general, you need to have power. And so it's no surprise that, again, the state comes out across as one of the most active. So out of these 404 cases where destruction or bannings were used, the state was actually responsible for 357. The second most popular form is something that was very hard for us to track. I have to tell you that, we're still trying to grapple with the methodology, but when we looked at pressure, gatekeeping, accusations, and challenges, right, out of 151 cases, 62 cases were actually done by what you would call the public. They could be public as in civil society groups, anonymous Facebook users, it could be all religious groups that were not institutional religious groups, right? So it's not the leadership, right? Oh, my time's running out. Okay, it'll be very fast. So it's all very bad, and end of presentation. 2 more minutes. Give me 1 minute. So I guess just to say that these things may not end in the work being censored, but what it's doing is it's creating an atmosphere of fear for the artists and the arts community. It's also normalizing, I think that's the bigger thing, it normalizes for the public this idea that, yes, if I don't like a work, I can stop it, right? So it has not just an impact on the arts community, but it has an impact on the zeitgeist itself. When we looked at responses, that's the other thing, you'll see that in most cases, majority of the cases, it was compliance, because sometimes it's too difficult for artists to fight back. And that then comes to the next point. Slide. By the time, what we found is that by the high compliance rate in a way relates to the fact that very often, in 67% of the cases that we looked at, the works were actually already in the public space. What it means is that the artists, the art group, had spent all the money, all the time. They often sold the tickets. They had the sunk cost. They had put in all of their money into the work already. And at that point, if you spend 6 months working on a play, and the censor says to you, change the religion of one of your characters, you might make that compromise because you are weighing things and it's just too difficult. So that's, I think, a really important thing, that, the system is actually built to give all of the power to those in authority. And so, we see this as we also looked at the fact that actually there's very little support and awareness for artists when these things happen. So we see this really as a point of opportunity for all of us, that how do we build resilience, knowledge, support when an arts group or an artist is attacked. The public response rate is 15%, which is very low. Last 2 slides. Just to very quickly, so these were some of the key findings that we can. I will talk more about this during the question and answer. I want to just maybe, what we have built on our website is there's a searchable database where you can actually go and search by country or by year or by form. It's a kind of prototype, so there are lots of things that we can do better in it, but it's quite fascinating to actually look at the kinds of cases that have occurred in the region. Okay, I will maybe talk a little bit about phase 2 later, but so I won't go to, can you just, you can scan the QR code and I'll show it again later, but do explore the website. And I'll now hand over to Adrian.
Okay, thank you very much for this comprehensive overview of the key issue from the research that has been done. Now we are going to the case, the various cases, and here we have Adrian Jonathan Pasaribu from Cinema Poetica, which is basically a collective of people in the film, artists, activists in Indonesia. So please tell us about Indonesia and the future of Indonesia, which is even more worrisome, I believe.
Okay, yeah. Thank you everyone for coming. So I just like what Katie mentioned, like every research basically leads us to a world of data, stories, and lots of narrative lines. And basically what I'm presenting now is just one narrative line. And it's what I feel is that the most convenient departure point to understand how art censorship usually works in Indonesia. In some cases, there are outliers, there are special cases, there are special occasions, but this is how it usually work in Indonesia. I pick out the term electoral risks because the easiest way to understand how society shifts in Indonesia is through elections. It could be national or presidential elections, but it actually also applies to provincial elections, local leaders, to like villages level or street level elections. I mean, it exists. But for this session, I'll just focus on the presidential election because it just happened a few months ago, actually. So this year actually is a bit risky because in the last 10 years, we have this president representing from the civilians, Joko Widodo, which at the time was seen as the new hope, and it was quoted in Time magazine somehow. As this new hope, but turns out he's just another old people because he basically towards his second term he collaborated with military, collaborated with former problematic generals who were involved in some massacres or some political scandals, which, just to make it short, paved the way for our new coming president, General Prabowo, which he was quite prominent in the New Order era. New Order era is during President Suharto before 98, from 66 to 98. At the time, it was officially named democracy, but in practice, it is a military dictatorship. So Indonesia is kind of heading toward a potential military dictatorship. So this shift is important because now the people nowadays, like the younger generation, the millennial, and like the older than millennial, now they are like facing. They have different memories of how Indonesia societies were. Like my age, like millennials, we remember the last years of the Suharto's New Order, but like the younger, the TikTok generation, sorry, but the TikTok generation, they don't know. And that's how basically General Prabowo wins the presidency. He basically copied the playbook of the Philippines president, and he promoted through TikToks, and nobody remembers or knows from the younger generation. They know nothing about his past sins. So this election, this year election has this. It's the last two elections because now we are changing a new president, and because of this high stake and high risk, we have lots of tension being generated by the authorities and also by other powerful parties that might be linked to the state, but sometimes they are not the state, non-state actors, but they have, agenda in how
the next government change. And arts, again, also included in this situation, in this public attention. So these are the most recent two cases. These are not in the database that are the articles, just recording stuffs. So these are the two most recent cases that I noted. First in November, there's this quite prominent artist, Poetica. I don't know what the theater performance was, but before he was performing, suddenly the police asked him to sign a non-disclosure agreement, basically not to perform anything related to the election. And that was November 2023. That's just 2 months before the candidates, the president's candidates, are allowed to campaign publicly. In February 2024, which that's actually just like that's in the same week of the election. This film, this documentary, The Exiles, was not allowed for screening in East Borneo, and it was quite strange because it was actually a private event. So basically, people rent the theater to screen this event. And because it's a private space, legally speaking, you don't need police permission. You just need to pay. It's a transactions business. But suddenly, the theater management says that, no, you don't have permit for the police. You cannot screen this film. Which, illegal, but sounds legal in a sense. But anyways, the film was not screened. So, why these two cases I highlighted? Because Poetica was quite a prominent performer. Even during Suharto's most oppressive times in the 90s or in the 80s, he was already voted. And he survived all these years. And suddenly, the last election, he was asked by the police to do this. Similar things happened for the Exiles, for the film, because this film was actually premiered 2 years ago in 2022 in a festival, quite big festival in Jakarta, Indonesia. And it actually had some kind of roadshow. And suddenly, when this screening was organized close to the election day, it's forbidden. So, what I'm trying to say is that in normal times, I mean, to understand why this happened, I mean, in normal times, arts in Indonesia is that they are seen as this strategic point for powers or for people or for entities that seek to establish public presence, that seek to establish reputation in the public sphere. And this relates to how nations are shaped politically. As I mentioned before, in the New Order era, during Suharto's rule, art was seen as this grassroots element that is capable for political subversion. And this was actually related to how Suharto rose into presidency in the 66, because he and the military, and which were backed by the U.S. government, they created this myth that the Communist Party was responsible for this failed coup in 65. And this myth or this rumor was seen as a justification to massacre all these left-wing people. Before 65, these left-wing parties, they are quite famous for organizing grassroots art events. And they promoted this art should be political, art should be for the masses, art should be for the benefit of the people. After 66, after Suharto rose into power, this discourse died. Art must be objective. Suddenly, all these paintings that usually depict farmers or poor people, it changed into shapes or colors that just shapes, which has no political message. Very abstract, an abstract art. So there's this shift. And then after 98, after Suharto fell, there's another big shift in Indonesian politics, the rise of religious conservatism. Because without any military dictatorship, basically the public sphere is open for anyone. that has enough sources or enough masses to mobilize ideas, to mobilize sometimes assault of violence, just to say that we are influential, you should listen to us. And it just happens to be the kind of entity that is able to pull this kind of massive scale movement are religious organization and hardline religious organization. Sometimes, in some aspects, they are actually linked to the state because they are partially funded by the police. Some credible journalistic reports have confirmed that. In some areas, in some instances, they are linked to foreign powers, which needs to be verified. I could not say more. But anyway, what I'm saying is that they have this massive influence in the public sphere, and they frequently target art, accusing art or artists or artistic activities as this place where moral transgression often happens, where people would go against God's words and things like that. So in Indonesia, basically, when you're saying art censorship, it's usually, not always, but usually it's public display of power. It's a way to show that you have power, you have enough political backing, you have this control of society. And this outlines the wider trend in Indonesia, art censorship as political optics. The aim is not to get artworks or artists out of circulation. You could, if you want, but of all the cases that I've researched for this project, very few works actually are out of circulation because they exist even after the censorship. So the target is basically just to draw attention towards the target and the values and social networks they represent while they are in the spotlight. So the censorship is not to forbid them, but actually to drive attention towards them, to drive pressure towards them. And it might sound weird, but it kind of makes sense if you look who are the usual targets. There are quite a number of cases LGBTQ communities are being targeted for being. These are quotes that I quoted for media, not my quotes. And there are also quite a significant number of cases that involve 1965 survivors. Those are the former communist members or alleged communists. They might not be communist. And Papuan independence movement for being traitors to the nation. So usually these are the extremes. It's either very moralistic or very security concerns. And these are like the general landscapes that happens. So like moral policing, that's where the LGBT features a lot. There are more actually. I mean, like because like there are also like structures, for example. It's seen as not fit in terms of the moral landscape for the religion in Indonesia because sculpture depicts it's basically unholy things. So there are that kind of interpretation that is used to justify censorship. There are other stuff that we could also talk about. These are like the general landscape. So in election years, this strategy is effective to shape public narratives to gather mass support, and this pattern has been apparent. We see this since the last two elections. In the previous election, there was this documentary, The Love Silence, that touched upon one of the survivors of the 65 tragedies. It was assaulted by various civil groups and put under surveillance by the military. But the funny thing is, the film was actually brought about in Indonesia by the government actually. So it's a really censorship. So it's kind of like the public censored the film, but also like the state censored the state also. And there was also, again, related to the 65 tragedy, there's also the Jakarta Arts Council and Ubud Writers, again, civil groups, and in the process, they also involve the authorities like police and military.
more recent, there is this weird case, the Mahagurutan Malaka. It's a short documentary that was partially funded by the state, by the Ministry of Culture, but it was not allowed to screen by the police because it touched upon this supposedly important communist figures. And also, and 1 year later, there was this teacher, researcher, who was arrested just for singing a parody of Mars Abri is actually the song for the National Army. And just for singing that, he was arrested. And it was basically just to make a statement that you cannot mess with us. He was released afterwards. He was fine. He's still. So yeah, I mean, this is related to what Kathy said. So it's the state institution dominated how the agents of censorship in Indonesia. But there are more nuances to this because when we say state institutions, they are just the primary because behind them or beside them there are other agents that are in play, and these are for me like the nuances that we rarely actually present because it's more complex. So yeah, that's what happens. That's the future of Indonesia.
Thank you. Well, Indonesia is close to my heart. Let me take the occasion to say that Duterte Cartareja actually was here in December last year talking about the election, and he will be doing an exhibition, which is interesting for VACC, in February here. Not necessarily only the political part, but he has an exhibition at the moment in Jakarta, which is extremely successful. So I think it's interesting from that case that actually was not persecuted. He went on to do even more than what he played again in Yogyakarta. He went on campaigning, saying all kinds of horrible things about the current president, and he was brought to the police by a group of people, but the president intervened to say, don't touch it, basically, because he's quite popular. So it's interesting to see how actually the artists find way to push the space. It's not only one direction. And this movie, which will be, again, I take the occasion for some promotion, Dirty Votes, was launched 2 days before the election and say basically all the frauds that has been committed before the election, including to allow the son of the current president to be the vice president. He won with Prabowo. So it's very complicated, but for those in Bangkok, don't miss these Dirty Votes because it says all. And it was allowed on YouTube, but it had millions of, so it's kind of contradictory. It's not one way, black and white. Okay, let's go to Thailand, please. We have again another expert, quite famous, Patporn Potong, Kun Oi. Yes, please tell us.
Thank you, Dr. Rosalia.
Researcher. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Actually, I have been recently joined the art creator just 2 months ago. 1 month? Yeah, 2 months ago. So actually, the presentation today is the efforts of Ajahn Sudarat Musikawong and her research assistant, Kunacha Banti Vitayapichat. Unfortunately, Ajahn Sudarat cannot be here with us today, so I'm going to present her work on censorship in art and cultural activities in Thailand on behalf of her. Okay, so first I would like to start with talking about the Thai political context, so you can see what happened in our Thai politics. So over the past 2 decades, so you can see in 2006 we have a military coup, and then in 2010 we have wretched massacre, and then again in 2014 we have another coup, and Why are you laughing? Yeah, two cools in actually sorry, just like I remember like when I was young, it's like I was in like a third grade, and one day I got back from school and I asked my mom that, Mom, what happened? School? What will be? Are we okay? And my mom, we live in Ranong back then, and she said that nothing happened. We will live as we always be. And back then, two cools recently, and I just like I always think about my mom's what she said. We always live as we always be, quote unquote. So anyway, so you can see sort of what happened with us, and it is a kind of like the foundation it is make us understand what the censorship comes from. So yeah, I have to go back to. Sorry. Next slide, please. Yeah. Yeah, so no, I have to see. The thing is like in Thailand, you see it's like many cool to places around. Like how many? If the Thai fellow can correct me, 13 or 18? Sorry, I don't have 13. Actually, it's more than 13. 13 successful. We have to say successful crew around 13, but around like I cannot count. Right? So, but the thing is like in Thailand, military authoritarianism is closely aligned with different sectors. So and it's lead to the strict enforcement of lèse majesté law or Article 112 of the Criminal Code. And this article, they like impose 3 to 15 years in prison, despite on many artists engaged in political or protest art. And most affected, like Kathy just says, visual arts and film. So we can see the data later. So according to the data, at Ajahn Sudarat reported since during 2010 to 2022, Thailand has recorded 64 violations in the database, and so it means it's like every year we have around 6 cases per year. And you can see during in 2014, the year that we had coup, that year 10 cases have took place, and again 9 cases reported in 2018. So that case is like 2014 and 2018 related to the event of ongoing protest movement at the key monument in Bangkok. If you remember, at that time it's like early morning, and suddenly it's like the plaque disappear, and the one monument that represents about 1932 revolution disappear from the intersection, if you remember that. Okay, so from this data, yeah, we can see it's like says like different form of arts were regulated. First is a visual arts. Visual arts is not just this one is included the monument, yeah, monument sculpture, and so we can see it's like the number of the visual arts form is like significantly high if compared with the other. And then film, in online broadcasts, in publications, music, and some other of art forms. So this is this is the agencies. So first, of course, state institutions include military, police officers, and other justice authorities, and not usually is like arrested, but sometimes if we can like I think that the Thai philosophy familiar is sometimes it's like not sometimes many times many often when we organize it's like even the like seminar academic seminars we observe that like some people some officer attend and ask some question. Actually sometimes it's like they just sit there, they just stand there behind the room, but it's create a tension. This kind of like threaten that we feel like we are not like we have to be careful the way we talk, the way we act, or our body language when we mention in particular things. So yeah, it is happen, and not only the authorities. Sometimes like the private like the galleries, publisher, or funder also play important roles in censorship, like remove the ads or like stop distribution of the books. For example, like the books that related to back then like series one, not series. It's like the book is like talking about LGBTQI, for example, or some is like related to so-called like political issue. In yes, it is there's a data that talking about the methods used to challenge the art form. The one example that Ajahn Sudarat talking, if we remember that in 2018, the art installation produced by K. Chulayanon Sripon in Krabi. It's a Krabi Biennale, right? The name is a bird of golden snail or กำเนิดหอยทากทอง in Thai. And then his work was reworked and defined due to it's like authority perceived it is like sexual provocation. So K or Chulayanon have to like take responsibility on the like the cost of like the production. So this example case. So this kind of information you can see more if you visit the website, the equator, the art equator, and you also can like email Ajahn Sudarat, and she's really happy to answer and discuss more about her research. And skip this one. And the limitation, because of like the project started when 2 years ago, right? Yeah. So the challenge, the limitation that Ajahn Sudarat and her team found is like about so many cases that the press or the media did not or have not reported, and it's kind of like I'm not sure if I use the right words, like low profile case, like the case happened in the provinces or happened in the southern part of some other places that not have been reported to the media, and then the researcher cannot like get the data. So there is a limitation. So for the next phase, so that's what I'm also thinking about is like how we can like access, how we can reach out to the case that we haven't known for, and not necessarily not that thing, and another thing, and next is will be self censorship, like maybe the future, because it's like before the authority, before it's like the society is like report or things, so the artists or those who like create the artwork or the cultural activities, because of the concern. So they have to like try to do something to like, it's not, it's like we have to survive, right? So yeah, and it is Ajahn Sudara's work, and you can like see her data more on the website. And for me, as a newcomer, I have I have like observation that yes, we can see during the political crisis, we can see the peak of the censorship. But how about the normal situation? How about now? And the question is like, okay, and is the censorship is somehow became something that we familiar with? We think that it's normal, it's happened again. It's the thing. It's like when we read the news, we're not excited anymore because we know that's going to happen. And another thing that's I worried is, and then one day it will become social consensus that this kind of thing, this kind of art, this kind of this issue of cultural activity, this kind of like this issue that the artists want to work is it would be kind of like cruel to like authorities, and we should not do that. This is the thing that I concern. I think that is the question that not only me and our Thai, my Thai fellows should think about it as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and also very interesting profile of Thailand. And we go now to the Philippines, Katrina Stewart Santiago of Pakasap, but she has many multiple roles. I read her views, and she can tell us more if she wish, because she has many acts, like anyone else on this panel. Please.
Hi, good afternoon. Sorry. Hi, good afternoon. I'm candidate number 4 from the Philippines. I feel like it's so beauty pageant. I keep thinking. So my presentation is very different from Miss Indonesia and Miss Thailand. Because I think that when we kind of started talking about heated political moments and how censorship happens in our different contexts, I realized that in the Philippines, it isn't really a particular political moment that kind of heightens the risk for art making or for censors to try and clamp down on certain kinds of creativity. So this also comes from the long paper that I wrote analyzing the data that we gathered on the Philippines for the first phase of the censorship database. And I think one of the main premises of one of the main things I think that you need to understand about the Philippines is that we kind of like take pride in being a democracy. Censorship is technically not allowed constitutionally. The Constitution actually enshrines the freedom of speech. Creative freedom is enshrined in our Constitution. So technically, there is no censorship. And you talk to any politician, they will say, no, there's no censorship. Right? It's a democratic country. But also, we're very Catholic. And so Catholicism permeates through governance. It permeates through our educational system. It's in our family systems. It's in our cultural systems, right? And so when you think of democracy in relation to Catholicism, think of how unfree we are in relation to religion, and the way it is practiced in a very diverse set of ways in the Philippines. And so there is regulation, but it's informed by very general terms like Philippine culture, local norms, morals, things that no one defines for us, things that anyone can actually put meaning into and say that is against my norms. And therefore, I am offended by this and it should be censored. There's also the fact that when government changes, the value systems also change. And I think this is why I kind of loved working on the first phase of the database, because it actually tracks the change of values from a very liberal Catholic president, Aquino, to a very populist, anti-Catholic President Duterte, who's also a murderer. But so that kind of value system is actually in this democracy. And so even when you have a democracy that's built on a constitution that says you shouldn't be allowed to kill people, you will get a president who can do so. And so that kind of value system is also something that I think affects the way we engage with our politics, the way we engage with issues of nation. And it's also in this way that I think arts and culture, creatives, artists, cultural workers are always random targets. Because you never know who's going to get offended. You never know what they're going to be offended by and when. Okay? So my first example for this is Carlos Celdran. Carlos Celdran is a performance artist, and he, at a time of a very heightened debate about the reproductive health law in the Philippines, which had languished for decades in the Senate and in Congress, he decided to go into a church where there was a full ecumenical event where all the bishops and religious leaders were. And he went in dressed as Jose Rizal, our national hero, who's also a novelist. And in Rizal's novels about the Spanish colonial era in the Philippines, there was one antagonist named Damaso, and Damaso was the abusive friar who raped a lot of Filipino women, etc., etc. And so he walked in, had this sign, and he paid dearly for it. And it was, of course, obviously a deliberate engagement with a heated political issue, which was the reproductive health law, something that then President Aquino was very much against because he's very conservative and very Catholic. And so this was an obvious engagement, and he paid dearly for it. He was found guilty on many counts of having offended religious sentiment. He died in exile in Spain a couple of years ago. As opposed to that, you have someone like Medeo Cruz, who did an installation called Polytheismo, which is polytheism. And it's actually a critique of Catholic religion in general, right? So Catholic education, Catholic icons, Catholic monuments, etc., etc. This came out in 2011 at around the same time that we were still in the throes of the Carlos Celdran case. The difference with Medeo is that this artwork had been exhibited twice before, in 2007 and in 2009. Both times, no one took offense. Both times, no one thought, oh, it's about a political issue. Both times, the Catholic Church maybe didn't see it because it wasn't in some big venue but in a small gallery. This time, right smack in the middle of a huge political issue like the reproductive health bill, Medeo also faced legal cases. He was made to face the Senate to talk about his artwork and to explain what it meant. And he had to actually remove himself from Metro Manila and live in the province, and has since just continued to do his work there up to now. And so the repercussions are long drawn out, and there's something on the screen that and so the repercussions are long drawn out. Medeo continues to grapple with all the things that he lost at the time that this happened to him in 2011. And not yet. Not yet. Okay. This one is more interesting. In 2010, we were going to have the elections for Noynoy Aquino. Now, this is the election that we won. And there were a set of short films that were on important national issues that were supposed to discuss, that were supposed to come out in relation to the elections. And all of them were censored by the censors board. And as you can see, the reasons are very random. It undermines the faith and confidence of the people in their government. tends to threaten the economic or political stability of the state. It shows unfeeling hospital personnel. This was a movie on nurses and doctors. It pictures the Filipino as the ultimate gambler, even gambles on the life and death of persons. So the randomness of this comes from the actual regulatory board that regulates film and television in the Philippines. And they actually gave this to me without thinking. So they're actually quite proud of the way in which they actually regulate film and television in the Philippines. What's interesting about Ambition also is that when it got censored, the producers decided to just tour it around campuses in Metro Manila in relation to the elections. And because it wasn't public, people didn't need to pay for it, then government had no way of actually keeping it from happening. It also later on appeared on YouTube after the election had already been won. Sorry. Okay. Here's another interesting case of this kind of randomness. In 2018, this is already Duterte years, and Duterte had this whole thing about being a friend to everyone and an enemy to none. He really meant China, but also he meant all other countries except for America. So in 2018, two monuments came up, one after the other. The Comfort Woman statue on the left appeared in Rojas Boulevard in Metro Manila, right smack in tourism district, by the Manila Bay. And then 2 months after, the statue on the right, which is the left, the Statue of Peace, which is a familiar one because it appeared also in a lot of places in Korea, was put up in a private space in San Pedro, Laguna, a province about 2 hours away from Manila. Both were taken down. And it was interesting because it happened very quickly. It went up on one day, about 5 days after both were already gone. And the reason was very simple. Government felt that it was offensive to the Japanese. The response of the Japanese embassy was also very swift. It came out, if it comes out today, they have a statement by the evening. By the rest of that week, we're just waiting for it to disappear. That political moment, there was no big discussion in relation to Japanese-Philippine relations. There was nothing that was being commemorated. But this was targeted anyway. And what's interesting about this is that we have comfort women texts all the time. We have films, we have plays, we have artworks, we have books on comfort women. And those don't get the ire of the Japanese embassy and are just available to the public now. But a monument, as Kathy said earlier, a monument, because it is so public, I think, kind of makes the reaction to it very swift. And this is also connected to this next case. Activist art took a blow during Duterte years. Generally, we're very, we let activist groups be. Governments before Duterte didn't really worry about them too much. But the 30 years were very different. In 2019, two activist groups, Panday Sining and the NUJP, the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines, had artworks taken down. The first one, the one on top, is actually an image of national hero Andres Bonifacio. He's the revolutionary to Jose Rizal's novelist. And it shows him with an Armalite. And he's asking what would Andres Bonifacio do in the face of martial law. Duterte did not care for this. And he was not the one who asked that it be taken down. It was the city mayor who did the work for him. And so the city mayor, on the premise of beautification and improving the city, was offended by just the act of graffiti. Not what it contained, just the act of dirtying the walls of the city. And so doing the populist thing, he, made a big deal out of erasing this himself. He went and, scrubbed the walls of his city just for, public consumption, and then made a big deal out of making the graffiti artists pay and calling them persona non grata from the city. That case is ongoing. The one below is a mural project that was created in commemoration of the Ampatuan Massacre. The Ampatuan Massacre is a political killing of a rival family in Mindanao where 58 were killed, family members plus journalists who were covering their movements. The mural, once it was done, they were actually bringing it from one protest rally to another. Once it was done, the police took it. It's still with the police. And so these cases are actually new in recent years, just because usually we just let the leftists be. We let activist art be because we're so familiar with them. We've had them forever. And so it's like, okay, it's a free country, right? And so when these were being censored and when artists were being made to pay for doing graffiti art or murals and public art, it was always such a surprise to us. And I think this kind of surprise is important. In Kathy's presentation, she talks about how the Philippines is actually the most frequently targeted is online or broadcast. And I think this is where the surprises usually happen. Broadcast television and film is heavily regulated. Filmmakers and TV producers and TV creators know exactly what they're not allowed to show on television. They know exactly what they won't be allowed to show in a commercial cinema. And so they kind of like play, they kind of play around that or try and create, create beyond those limitations or within those limitations. And usually because it's such big money and there is a public audience for it, they kind of just comply, right? But I think the numbers for broadcast censorship also has a lot to do with the fact that the regulatory board only really reacts to already broadcast material when the public is offended. And we don't need to know who this public is. They just need to be able to say, we received 5 phone calls and they were all offended by this one thing that came out on television. And then they will talk to the producer of that show. The next day, that producer will apologize and then they're done. And so none of these cases ever become really big. All of them actually just kind of fold and comply. And I think it's also because you never know what will offend viewers. In a democracy, especially like the Philippines, where we kind of, make a big deal about everyone having an opinion. That opinion can be against an artwork, and depending on how loud your voice is and how big a group you have behind you, then you can totally take an artwork down. You can totally file a case against an artist, and you can totally jail an artist, right? And so I think that there's also that kind of, it's why I talk about random targets, because this could be a random target, just me talking about it right now. Or it couldn't be. And you'll never know, right? And I think that's also why I wanted to also talk about this kind of randomness, because to an extent, I think it exists in most of our research for Southeast Asia so far. That deliberately engaging with a politically heated issue or moment does not necessarily mean censorship. Many of us get away with it. And yet, also that kind of randomness, on the one hand keeps us free. We kind of just want to see how far we can push. We kind of want to see what else we can say that will not get the ire of government or the public. But also that randomness tells you that we're perennially at risk, because you never know when you're going to offend someone. You never know when government will be offended by something you did. last year, but which this year is suddenly not acceptable. And I think that kind of randomness is interesting also because the topic of this whole session was really about art making in a time of crisis in Southeast Asia. And I think it's important to realize that if you're an artist or a cultural worker in Southeast Asia, you're always in crisis precisely because this is all about people getting offended by what we do and us not having the means to defend ourselves, us not having, a more solid set of protections for ourselves, whether within our contexts or within the region itself. Maraming salamat.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very interesting, and I hope indeed it's not random that you will be censored now here. But okay, let's go to the discussion. So we have quite a lot of material, very interesting, both from the overall project as well as from the cases. Anyone to comment or ask? I will take 3 comments first, and then we can see how it goes. Who break the ice? Anyone? I'm looking for volunteers. No? No one there to expose himself. Too sensitive, the topic. So maybe you want to add, oh, okay, here, please.
I'm curious about the random.
Can you introduce yourself?
Okay, I'm Farida. I'm prepared. Teach at Thammasat University at the Theater Arts Department. So I'm curious a little bit about, for each country, for the cases of random accusation, especially, in today's world, the online accusations can happen so easily. And in Thailand's case, I think the public has become very clever at using pseudonyms, in attacking whatever targets they want. So I'm curious about, once the public expose their opinions, who are the ones that actually go to the police and press charges on these artists? I mean, this is for all the countries.
In the Philippines, let's say there's like online noise about being offended. Like very recently, it was a live noontime show where there's a queer couple, and they were playing with some icing of a cake, and there was public outcry. People were offended by that. They thought it was sexual. It wasn't. To me, it wasn't. But the Catholics were kind of offended by it, and so they thought it was sexual. And what happened was there was enough online noise first for the regulatory board to send them a warning and to ask them to come to a meeting. And then they were made to explain what those actions were and why it shouldn't be sanctioned. And that's an interesting case. It isn't in the database yet because it's for phase 2, but it's an interesting case because the show was suspended for a full week. And the show's producers decided they weren't even going to contest it. They agreed to the suspension as a form of protest. Because they didn't think it was offensive at all. They were just like 2 queers playing with cake. And so that ended there. They accepted the suspension. It was and then made a statement about protesting it, but not wanting to have to comply with issuing a public apology, which is usually what compliance means. The other cases are different. For example, Medeo Cruz's Politeísmo, that was a combination of a media entity framing it as a reproductive health related artwork, and then a public that was very offended by it because they were religious and it showed the crucifix, etc. And then Catholic organizations actually filing a case against him, and then the Philippine Senate holding an inquiry, and then the President of the Philippines also encouraging the discussion on it, which is why it was such a big deal. And so it's very rare that it becomes a police thing. It's usually the civil society that will file a case against what has been deemed offensive by that public.
Yeah, in Indonesia, the thing is, it usually starts online. Not always, but usually. The most common method that I remember is using the change.org petition. Well, it's very specific, but somehow it works. One famous case that I could on top of my head right now is this Garino Brojo's film, Memories of My Body, 2009 or something. It's about this Japanese dancer, which there's this tradition in Central Java, male dancers wearing female women clothes to perform. It's one of those traditions. So basically, this film suddenly this film was passed. The censorship board approved it. The censorship board has no problem with it. Basically, the state has no problem with it. And then when this film was released in theaters, previously the film actually represented Indonesia at International Film Festival, but when it was released domestically, suddenly there were two change.org petitions circulating through WhatsApp groups, and then later on through Twitter or X and Facebooks, protesting these films, telling them, accusing the films to be spreading LGBT ideology, whatever that means, and accusing the director to be these proponents or agents of this ideology. So this petition made waves. It became viral, and that's the thing. After something become viral, it might start as this purely civilian or again random protest, but then some other powers or authorities jump in on it, because when these two petitions went viral, some local leaders or provincial like the governors or city majors, they made statements to the media saying that this film is promoting LGBT, it's not our culture, so this film shall not be screened in this region. But the thing is, the film was actually not screened in the region anyway for business reasons. but the authorities, they jumped in on this. So this thing happens quite a number of times. I remember another exhibition, probably 17 or 18. It's basically I think this is the case that we talked about. There's this young artist making an art installation using breast milk. It was controversial, and again, it actually started from an Instagram post, which led to a petition. I forgot whether it was changed or but it was a petition protesting this art installation, saying that again, you're using this material from woman's body and whatever, and it's immoral. So it started as this very commotion in the public sphere, and then this minister, if I'm not mistaken, from the Women Empowerment, Ministry of Women Empowerment, she jumped in on this thing, on this case, making statements, accusing the installation. I forgot what was the accusation, but the pattern was like that. It started as this online commotion, and then some other parties, usually the state, jumped in.
Any other question or comment? If not, maybe we do concluding remarks about, well, it has gone quick, it's almost 7 o'clock, but so please give some concluding remarks about what maybe the second phase of the project, which you have not talked much. Yeah.
Maybe I'll ask if you would mind actually showing the slide with the QR code so that people who didn't get a chance to can actually scan the QR code and visit the website. So we did the pilot for 2 years, and I think it was an experience. We have a wealth of data that's come out of it, but it also, the pilots are always there to test out and, do things wrong. We did a lot right, but we did some things that we can do better. So we're actually, all of us, the research team is actually in Bangkok because we're having a kind of closed-door team meeting to redesign the research tool that we've designed. We're in the middle of kind of refining it. And the idea would be that we will now be documenting 2023 and 2024 cases. Moving forward, the two things we would like to do is we would like to extend it to more countries in Southeast Asia. There are 11 countries in Southeast Asia. We've only covered 6. And then the other thing which has come up every time we give presentations, the artists tell us that, yeah, this is great, but actually a lot of my censorship comes from self-censorship, or it's hidden, right? So we have set ourselves the task for next year. We would like to find a way, a methodology to actually measure and document, self-censorship, right? What is it that, what is it that actually prevents you? What's your experience and so on? So that's the direction we'd like to go in. We are not, so maybe just to also say that Articulate is a very small charity. The teams that we have are excellent, but we're small. So we're not trying to do everything. We're our strength is in the research, and it's trying to understand what's happening on the ground with artists. We hope that with the data that we produce, that there will be other organizations, whether it's artists, activists, legal organizations, human rights organizations, that will take the data that we're producing and actually be able to kind of more activate, do advocacy and support artists. But one clear thing that we know is that artists really need to know their rights. It's actually shocking how few artists understand from a cultural rights perspective, they actually have a lot of rights, but no one uses that argument. So I think artist education, artist support, artist knowledge is a really important part of what we're doing. Yes, and can I just end with maybe introducing the other collaborators who are here? So Linda is our Vietnam researcher. Zikri Rahman is Malaysia. Kai Brennett and Manin Art are from Cambodia. The co-researchers of Cambodia. Did I forget? Oh, yes. And then Arts Equator has been actually working with Five Art Center from Malaysia, Mark Tay, who a lot of people in this room know. And also we have actually someone that we've actually been building kind of a working relationship with, Frederick Elk from Safe Havens Freedom Talks from Sweden. Thank you. I'd like to really thank Rosalia for the warm welcome and for organizing. Thank you all for coming.
Okay, it's not finished yet because we still know we have some coffee, tea, and some small snacks, so you can continue the conversation about this important topic with the authors that are here. And then please, on your way out, don't forget to give a donation to support C-Junction activities. And I also want to announce the next one, which is going to be on Tuesday, about Myanmar. So will be the launching of the book on welfare and other issues related to Myanmar on the 21st of May. And of course, please take a look also at the exhibition that is at the moment ongoing. Thank you very much. Thank you for collaborating for us, and I hope there will be other occasions with all of you. Thank you. And by the way, this is from Poetica.